So it's our family tradition that we always have challah for Shabbat, and we love making it ourselves as well. One thing I want to suggest for this week is, as we go through this recipe, is that perhaps you want to think about making an extra challah as well. Maybe there's someone who maybe lives near you, you could put one in their mailbox, someone who needs a challah, or leave someone who just might need a little bit of joy this week. And so with that thought, I'm going to turn it over to Suzy and have her take it away. So thanks everyone, let's go.
Am I okay? I'm unmuted. Hi, everybody. Sorry, hold on. Let me undo this. Okay, so hello. I'm going to just assume that we're all starting with clean hands. If you haven't washed your hands, you might want to run and go and do that. And I also want to recommend, even though I am having such a good time looking at everybody in gallery view, if you're looking in gallery view, I'm probably about this big, and you might want to change to speaker view, just so that you can see what I'm doing. Okay, so this challah recipe that we're going to make today is super, super simple. So the first myth that I want to dispel is that baking bread is difficult, because as you're going to see, this is a really easy recipe. It's almost foolproof. And it's actually a little bit of an abbreviated process. Usually when you make challah and other kinds of breads, you make a dough and you let it rise, and then you come back to it and you shape it, and then you let it rise again, and it's a lot of different steps. This recipe has one rise time. It's only 45 minutes. So it's quick. So we're going to make a dough, and then we're going to show you how to braid your challah, and then it's going to be ready to bake after that. You're going to have 45 minutes of rise time, but we're not here because I, through the magic of television, have some dough that's already ready to shape. So with that, I think we should get going. So the ingredients that we need, you all have recipes, I think, that you got to peek at ahead of time, but we're going to be using flour, yeast, water, salt, and eggs, and that's it. So what everybody is going to start with is, and you'll forgive me if I'm going from memory and not in order of the recipe. I'm not looking at the recipe, but it's going to work whether you follow the recipe or whether you follow what I'm doing. So I have a cup of water. I know that the recipe says that it should be, I think, 110 degrees. Basically, you want water that's warm but not hot. And the reason for that is that yeast is alive, and if water is too hot, it kills the yeast. And yeast is the ingredient that is going to allow our bread to rise. So we're going to use warm water. So you can dump that into your bowl, okay? And then your yeast. A packet of yeast. You can use any kind of yeast actually will work. I just so happen to have instant yeast, so if that's what you have, that's great. It's 2 1/4 teaspoons or 1 packet. So you're going to sort of sprinkle that on top of your water, and just like a note to those who are using instant yeast, you don't actually have to wait for instant yeast to bloom. It can go right in, okay? But other yeast, you kind of have to give it a minute to activate. And that just takes a minute. So you're going to sprinkle it over your water. And then yeast, because it's alive, is also hungry. And we have to feed it. And that's what gets it working. So we've got, and I forgot to measure out my sugar, but you're going to add 2 tablespoons of sugar, which I'm going to get 1 second. I'm still here. Okay, 2 tablespoons of sugar, coming right up. So you're gonna dump in your sugar. You can sprinkle that right on top of your yeast and your water in your bowl. All right? And I'm wondering if I should be looking to see if anybody has questions for me while we're doing this. I'm going to open my chat. Okay. And you're going to just whisk that together, and it's going to look like a brownish, murky mess. If that's what you have in your bowl, you're doing things exactly right. Okay? You're going to add your salt. So we've got a teaspoon of salt. Any kind of salt will work. I tend to use kosher salt for everything. Kosher salt, it's still kosher if you don't use kosher salt. You can use sea salt, you can use regular table salt, it all works. So a teaspoon, that's gonna go in, okay? And then, one of the things that makes challah challah is eggs. It's an egg bread. So we're gonna use 3 whole eggs. So I recommend always cracking eggs into a separate container, and that way, if you get shell in there or something, you can grab it before it ends up in your dough. So 3 eggs into a bowl. You're gonna just lightly beat them. Basically, you wanna break up the yolk so that it incorporates, okay? And that's gonna go right into your bowl with your yeast and your water and your salt and your sugar. And you're gonna just give that a quick mix with your whisk. All right, are we good? Are we all going at the same pace? It's very weird that I can't hear anybody. Thumbs up? We're good? Okay. Okay. All right, so just to review so that we're all going at the same pace here, in our big bowl here, we have got yeast, water, salt, sugar, egg. Yes? Okay. Now we're gonna add flour, and I've given you measurements for flour. I tell you 3½ cups of flour, but here's a trick. We're not gonna add all the flour at once, because one of the sort of kind of tricky things about baking bread is that one of the factors that can make a difference in your dough is the weather. So if it's really dry, today is not a really dry day. Today there's a lot of moisture in the air. So in all likelihood, our wet ingredients are gonna do less work than they would on a day that was really dry. So some days a dough requires more flour than others. So we'll see what happens today. We're gonna start with 3½ cups of flour. We might find that we need more flour because it's sort of moist. But we'll go bit by bit and I'll show you what your dough is gonna look like at different points. Okay, so I would say start with 1 cup of flour. So you're gonna just dump in 1 cup of flour, you're gonna use a spoon, and you're gonna mix it up. So we're gonna keep adding flour until we get a pretty sticky dough. I will also mention that if you wanted to, you could do this in a stand mixer. So you would be using your paddle attachment still at this point, and then I will let you know when you would switch to the dough hook. All right, so you've got a cup of flour in. We can all agree probably that this is not a pretty looking dough at this point. It's sort of a lumpy mess, and that's exactly right. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and add a 2nd cup of flour. And I suggest you do the same. Okay, Rabbi Jaffe is saying that they ended up needing 4 cups of flour earlier this morning. So did I. Rabbi Jaffe, do you have a challah that you already baked? Do you have a finished product? Oh yes, I can slow down. We're still stirring. I'm sorry if I'm going too quickly. All right, so I've got 2 cups of dough so far. 2 cups, I keep saying dough. And I'm gonna just show you what I've got like a really runny batter. What? I'm not using your yeast. I have 2 helpers who are gonna come knead dough with me. But not yet. But not yet. Okay. Okay, so we're still adding flour bit by bit. I'm gonna go ahead and add a 1/3 cup of flour. If you're still catching up, that's fine. All right, so cup number 3 is going into my bowl. I'm gonna mix it and then I'm gonna show you what it looks like. And I'll just mention that one of the fun things, we're gonna get to this part later, one of the things that you can do to sort of mix, forgive the pun, sort of mix things up with your challah is the toppings. So we are a family of plain challah lovers, but when we put on an egg wash later, which I'm gonna show you how to do, that's the point when you can sprinkle stuff on top of your challah. So sometimes people will put poppy seeds, sometimes people will put sesame seeds. You could do some flaky salt on the top. You could put cinnamon and sugar on top of your challah. I think we've made it with that everything but the bagel stuff that you can get at Trader Joe's, that was a super yummy one, but you could sort of use your imagination and think up different toppings to put on top of your challah. Okay, you could put raisins. You know what, I would probably not put raisins on top of the challah because they have a tendency to burn, but if you wanted to fold some raisins into the actual dough, you could absolutely do that. And I would do that when you get to the point in the process when you're actually kneading the dough. Okay, so I did 3 cups of flour and you can see this is like still a super duper sticky dough. So I'm gonna not even add 3 1/2, I'm gonna add a whole 4th cup because I think it's gonna need it. Za'atar seasoning. Yes, I love that idea. All right, so now I'm adding flour and it's getting a little bit harder to stir. So that is when you start to get worried that all of your flour is not gonna go into the dough, you're probably on the right track. Okay, so what I'm getting here, and I'm gonna try to show you, is a really sort of shaggy looking dough. All right, so we're almost at the point where we're ready to start kneading this dough, and I'm gonna show you what that looks like. All right, so this is, my dough is starting to come together and look less like batter and more like dough. Okay, are we all sort of kind of getting to the same place? All right, so here's what mine looks like in my bowl. Can everybody see that? So it's starting to be like a sticky looking mass. All right, so I'm almost ready to turn my dough out onto a surface for kneadings. I like to put down a sheet of parchment paper on my counter just because it sort of keeps things in one place and it tends to keep it from sticking. But if you don't have a sheet of parchment paper, don't worry about it. What you're going to do when you are ready, can you use wax paper? You could, wax paper can't go into the oven, but I think it would work for just, you know, sort of mitigating mess when it comes to cleanup time. I think wax paper would be just fine. So even though I'm using parchment, I am gonna sprinkle a little bit of flour on top of my parchment. And a trick, sort of a chefy trick, is that the higher up you hold your hand when you are sprinkling something, so if you're salting food or sprinkling flour on a surface like this, the higher up you start, sort of the more even and sort of more surface area you'll cover. So sprinkling down here, you get little piles. Sprinkling up here, you get sort of a more even dusting. A little tip. Okay, so even though my dough looks still like pretty sticky and shaggy, I'm gonna lob it onto my parchment because we wanna, you wanna sort of err on the side of not enough flour because that's a problem that's not so hard to correct. Too much flour is a tough one. So I've got my sticky dough on my parchment and I'm gonna add a little bit more flour to it. my bowl to the side. All right, so I'm gonna sprinkle some flour on top. This is the point, it's full, thank you. This is the point at which, if you were doing this in a stand mixer, I would take off the paddle attachment and put on the dough hook, because the dough hook is what's gonna knead your dough for you. All right, so this is messy. Just prepare yourselves emotionally for the mess. All right, so I'm gonna sort of mix the flour into my dough here. I'm just sprinkling and folding. I don't know if you can see. Do I need to angle? Do you need to angle my camera? Hang on, I'm gonna yell to my cameraman. Hold on just one second. Mitchell, Abe, I need you. Here comes my cameraman. My hands are too sticky. Okay, so kneading dough. Can you just angle it down a little bit so they can see what's happening on the parchment? Is that good? Okay, so I've got this sort of sticky dough happening here, but I've been sprinkling it with a little bit of flour every now and again, and folding it over onto itself and pushing it away, because that is how we knead. And this is a great time. I mean, I could have involved my children in every step of the way, but you would have learned less. But now I'm going to invite my kids to come and do some kneading. And basically what we're looking for, ultimately, hang on just one second. We're gonna take turns. So one person at a time. I go first. So what you're looking for is a very elastic feeling dough. Can I try? Basically, hold on just one second. What you want when you pinch it, you want it to feel a little bit like you're pinching your earlobe. So kind of firm, but kind of squishy, okay? So right now, I'm very glad that my earlobe does not feel like this. That would be a medical problem that we would need to address. Okay, so girls, here's what you're gonna do. All right, so what we're doing when we knead the dough is you can angle it back up, babe, please. What we are doing is we are developing the gluten, and gluten is the protein in flour that basically is what makes dough elastic. It makes it stretchy and it makes it spring back. So we're developing the gluten in this way. Okay, so I would say generally it's probably about 3 to 5 minutes of kneading to get it to the right texture. And the truth of the matter is this is a very, very forgiving dough. So even if you don't have like the most perfect texture, if it doesn't actually feel like your earlobe, you're gonna end up with a delicious loaf of challah. Great, yeah, thank you girls.
It does not feel like my earlobe.
Super helpful. Go wash your hands. Go. All right, so kneading dough, just one last time I will mention, you're folding it over and pushing it away. Folding it over and pushing it away.
On the other computer, you'll see.
All right. I'm gonna, still very sticky dough, Andrea, add more flour. Just keep sprinkling it with flour. If anybody else is having that problem, it's a wet day, and so it may just take more flour. There are some days like that. But I would just, if you make this again on another day, I really would start with the 3.5 cups, because there will always be a day when that's the right amount, or maybe even, you know, a little much. Okay, so once your dough is feeling pretty elastic and like a nice smooth dough, you see my hand is not, no dough is coming away when I am doing this. So it's ready. So what you're gonna do is, let's see, would you then not be able to substitute gluten-free all-purpose flour? You cannot make this kind of dough with gluten-free flour because it's not elastic in the same way. So there are some really good gluten-free challah recipes. They tend to be more like a batter and less like a dough. So I would recommend, there are some online. Anybody who would like is welcome to email me, because I think I have gluten-free challah dough. Oh, the other thing that I want to mention is I would love to see the finished product. So I'm going to take you all the way up until the baking part today. I would love to see your finished product. So I don't know if there's a way you can maybe post them on Instagram and tag me or tag Temple Bethel or something like that. But I think it would be really fun to see the finished product. Okay, so when you have your ball of dough, are most people getting close to that point? Sort of, kind of? Is anybody there? They're all still kneading. I know, but they can nod and give me thumbs up. Okay, so I'm going to take my dough and put it in a bowl that I'm first going to oil. So you could use some olive oil, you could grease it with butter, you could spray it with some non-stick spray. You just want to make it so that later on our dough is not going to stick to the bottom of the bowl. So I'm going to grab a bowl. All right, so I've got my bowl, and I am gonna pour in just a little bit of vegetable oil. And I like to take either a pastry brush or a piece of paper towel and just kind of rub it around in the bottom of the bowl. Just like a thin film of oil in the bottom of the bowl. Okay, that could stick a little bit. And in goes my dough. And then you cover it with, you could cover it with a dish towel, you could cover it with some plastic wrap. Just want to make sure that the bowl is covered. I'm going to use a towel. Okay, and then that sets aside for 45 minutes. Okay. Are we good? Everybody doing okay? Do we have thumbs up? Yes? Good. Okay. If your hands look like my hands, you can wash them off at this point. Just make sure they're really dry for the next step. I'm going to leave mine looking like this. All right. I'm going to give everybody like a minute or so to catch up. I feel like I may have jumped ahead a little. How long to knead with a stand mixer? Thank you for asking that question. That should take like 2 or 3 minutes, really not much longer. You might want to stop it partway through and just make sure that it's not, so give it a quick scrape. Because sometimes when the stand mixer has a tendency to just kind of not pick up some of the flour that's at the bottom of the bowl, and you want to make sure you incorporate all of that. Okay. So I'm going to show you, I have dough that I made earlier, and you saw what our before dough looked like. All right, so here's before, and I'm about to show you after. Mine's been rising for a little bit more than 45 minutes, which is fine, but that's how big it got. So you can tell that the yeast is working. So what I'm going to do next, I only have sunflower avocado oil. Is that better than olive? Totally fine. Any oil. It's not really, you're not going to end up tasting it. It's just to keep it from sticking to the bowl, to the bottom of the bowl. Any oil. Okay, so I'm just gently kind of pulling it all towards the center of the bowl. So it shrunk, but that's okay. All right, and I'm going to take it out. I'm going to flour. I'm going to flour my counter. I'm going to do exactly what I said I wasn't going to do, but I'm going to flour my counter a little bit just so we don't get sticking. And I'm going to put my dough that's already been rising up. You made me full screen. That's great. Okay, so babe, can you tilt it down just a little bit? So I've got my piece of dough, and I'm going to cut it into 3 somewhat equal sections. Okay? No, that's good. All right, so this is what you're going to do later. So this is the demo portion of our show. Okay, so I've got 3 somewhat equal sections of dough. And this is a fun part for kids. I need 2 helpers right now, please. And you're gonna take each piece of dough and roll it into a snake. Okay. All right. Roll it into a snake. And a good way to do that is you're rolling and sort of stretching at the same time.
And they can't touch each other.
And I will just mention that Rabbi Jaffe suggested making a second loaf of challah to give away, which is an idea I love. You could very easily just double this recipe. So you could also divide this dough into 6 pieces and make 2 braids, and they would be sort of, well, because then they would be, so 3 pieces is 1 challah, then 6 pieces would be how many?
3.
2.
2.
As a homeschooling success story. So you could also make 2 smaller challahs. Okay, so you want your snake to be this long. How long is that?
My snake doesn't look
Mitchell.
very good. It's good.
Looks like, why don't I get the
Roughly.
14 inches?
14 inches.
Is mine 14
Okay.
inches?
All right, so yeah. Okay, so you've
Mine
got
is not
3.
14
Yours looks great. Okay.
Yay!
So
Now he's
okay, thank you, assistant. So you're gonna take your 3.
Go measure in.
I have, this is just a regular sheet pan, which I've lined with a piece of parchment paper. So you're gonna take your 3 strands of dough and put them on your sheet. And you're gonna pinch them together at one end, like this, okay? And then we're gonna start to braid. So parents of children who have long hair, you should be excellent at this already. But to braid challah, what you do is you're gonna take, and to braid hair for that matter, you're gonna take your outside strand and fold it over the middle so that the middle then becomes the outside. And you're gonna do the same thing with your outside strand on the left, or stage left, I guess. And that goes into the middle. And you're gonna continue bringing the outside strands into the middle. And if you go online on YouTube, you'll find videos for all different sorts of like really fancy ways to braid challah. You could do a 6-stranded loaf, you could do a braided round loaf, you can do just a regular round loaf, but this is pretty traditional. Okay, so when you get your long braid, what you then want to do is just sort of tuck under the ends and just kind of pinch it a little bit. Okay. And then you have like a little bit more of a compact loaf. Okay. All right, so we've got our braided loaf. And as I mentioned, a lot of times at this point you would then let your dough rise again. But this is our super speedy, super easy challah recipe, so we don't even need to do that. So the next step that we're going to do is brush it with egg yolk. And that sort of enhances the color, and it also gives it a really pretty shine. So I have 1 egg yolk. I just separated the yolk from the white, and you can save the white for a different purpose. If you don't want to mess with separating an egg, just beat a whole egg. That will work just fine. I took 1 yolk, and I don't think that my recipe says to do this. You can do straight yolk. I tend to find it's a little bit easier to brush it on if you add a tiny bit of water to sort of thin it out. And then you take a pastry brush. If you don't have a pastry brush, you could use your fingers, you could use a paper towel. Really, anything works. You don't need lots of special equipment. Okay, so I'm just brushing it with the egg wash.
Suzy, can I say something for a moment?
Yes.
This might be a wonderful time for us to introduce the mitzvah of taking challah, just
right.
like the way you remember that your parents and grandparents used to do, correct?
Yes, and thank you for remembering to mention that. I forgot.
Tell me, what do you remember? What happened? And then we're going to explain this to everyone. What's your memory?
So I remember baking challah with my grandmother, and she would pull off a piece of the dough. I think actually before this step, before we would braid it, she would pull off a piece of the dough, and I feel like there was a prayer she would say, and it was maybe to remember people who didn't have. I can't remember.
Very good. So
Okay.
let's take a moment on that. So luckily, I've got a copy of the Torah right here that I'm reading from.
How
And
handy.
look at this. And I may not be much of a baker or chef, but I can figure this out here. And it says here in the book of Numbers, chapter 15, "Beboachem el haaretz asher ani nevi etchem shama." When you go into this land that I will bring you to, "V'haya ba'achalchem milechem haaretz tarimu truma la'Adonai." When you eat there of the bread of the land, you will give an offering first of it to God. And the idea is that we are in partnership with God when we make challah and when we cook together. God gives us the ingredients, the wheat, the sugar, all the things we put together, and then we act in unison to put those things together and make something beautiful. But we can't say it's all ours, because we would never have this if we weren't provided by the earth all of these wonderful resources. So when we make challah, we first take a piece of it off, and okay, take it off now. Take a piece of the challah right here, and there is a blessing. The blessing is lehafrish challah. That is over separating the challah, and starts with the usual Baruch Atah Adonai. So you're going to grab a piece of the challah like this, separate piece, and you're going to repeat after me. Baruch Atah Adonai,
Baruch atah Adonai,
Eloheinu melech haolam,
Eloheinu melech haolam,
asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav,
asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav,
v'tzivanu
v'tzivanu,
lehafrish challah,
lehafrish challah.
which is that we separate out the challah. And this then does not go into the challah recipe. This is kept separate throughout. And I love the interpretation, Suzy, that you mentioned from your grandmother, that it's not just the fact that challah was taken when we enter the land, but also it's a remembrance of the fact that we are lucky to have challah, and that there are those who do not have, or have very meager portions. And so maybe it's another thought for us to be extra sensitive and generous to others during the Shabbat. So there we go, and now we'll turn it back over to you with the egg wash. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. Okay, so I have brushed my challah with egg wash, and this is the point at which you could sprinkle it with whatever toppings are exciting. You could even make stripes if you wanted to do sesame seeds and then poppy seeds and then something, onion or something like that. So that's when you would put your toppings on. As I mentioned, we have certain members of our household who shall remain unnamed who would revolt against that. So mine is going to stay plain. And now it's going to go into the oven. I have the oven at 350. And it's going to go in for about a half an hour, 30 to 35 minutes. Oh, you can look at it. You live here, so you can see it right now.
You're going to see it when it's done. Leave me alone.
So it's going to go in for about 30 to 35 minutes. And what you are looking for is obviously a really beautiful golden brown on top. But to know that your challah is done, you grown-ups are going to gently flip over the challah and give it a knock on the bottom. And if it sounds hollow, it's good. Professional bakers take the temperature of bread to make sure, don't worry about that. If it sounds hollow, good. If it's still a really light color after 30, everybody's oven is different, so if it's still a really light color after 30, 35 minutes and it sounds like it's still a heavy brick in there and not, hollow on the inside, just let it keep going and check it a few more times. But that's really it. And then the hardest part is resisting the urge to eat it. Just rip off a hunk while it's still super hot. Let it cool down a little bit. That's it. Any questions from anybody? What? Everyone's muted. I know. All right, well, that's all from me. I really want to see your pictures. I can't wait to see how everybody's challah comes out. And I'm so happy that we got to do this together. Oh, somebody's asking Jen to unmute. I agree. So wonderful to be together to do this. This is really fun. Thank you, everybody. And good Shabbos. That's right. Oh, hi.
Good Shabbos.
There we go. We're all unmuted. Suzy, thank you so much for this. Shalom to you.
I can't get out of this.
Thank you.
I can't get out of this.
Hey.